Okay, let me get through introductions and then I'll continue taking the list. I'm Laura Payton. I'm moderating this morning. With me is Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney, Senior Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem. S'il vous plaît, fermez vos appareils portables and signal me if you would like a question. We only have half an hour, so please keep the questions brief. And I'm going to ask our respondents to keep their answers as brief as possible, please. And we will get as many questions in as possible. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Good morning, everyone. Tiff and I are very pleased to be with you this morning to discuss our January monetary policy report, which we just published this morning. Well, the global economic outlook is slightly weaker than the bank had projected in our October MPR. Importantly, global tail risks have diminished. La croissance se poursuit à un rythme graduel aux États-Unis, étant restreinte par le désendettement encore dans les secteurs publics et privés, la faiblesse de l'économie mondiale et l'incertitude entourant les négociations budgétaires. L'Europe demeure en récession et on s'attend maintenant à ce que le ralentissement se prolonge un peu plus qu'anticipé en octobre. La croissance se raffermit en Chine, mais l'activité a encore ralenti dans d'autres grandes économies émergentes. Soutenu par les actions menées par les banques centrales et l'évolution positive de politique en Europe, les conditions financières mondiales sont plus expansionnistes. Commodity prices have remained at historically elevated levels, though temporary disruptions and persistent transportation bottlenecks have led to a record discount on Canadian heavy crude. In Canada, the slowdown in the second half of 2012 was more pronounced than the bank had anticipated, owing to weaker business investment and exports. Caution about high debt levels has begun to restrain household spending. The bank expects economic growth to pick up through 2013. Business investment and exports are projected to rebound as foreign demand strengthens, uncertainty diminishes, and the temporary factors that have weighed on the resource sector activity are unwound. Nonetheless, exports should remain below their pre-recession peak until the second half of 2014, owing to a lower track for foreign demand and ongoing competitiveness challenges, including the persistent strength of the Canadian dollar. Consumption is expected to grow moderately and residential investment to decline further from historically high levels. The bank expects trend growth in household credit to moderate further, with the debt-to-income ratio stabilizing near current levels. Relative to the October MPR, Canadian economic activity is expected to be more restrained. Following an estimated 1.9% growth in 2012, the economy is expected to grow by 2% in 2013 and 2.7% next year. The bank now expects the economy to reach full capacity in the second half of 2014, later than we had anticipated in October. Core inflation has softened by more than the bank had expected, with more muted price pressures across a wide range of goods and services, consistent with the unexpected increase in excess capacity. Total CPI inflation has also been lower than expected, reflecting developments in core inflation and, importantly, weaker than projected gasoline prices. Total CPI inflation is expected to remain around 1% in the near term, and it's expected to rise gradually along with core inflation to the 2% target in the second half of 2014 as the economy returns to full capacity and inflation expectations remain well anchored. Malgré la réduction des risques extrêmes à l'échelle mondiale par suite d'une série de mesures prises par les autorités européennes et américaines, des risques importants continuent de peser sur les perspectives d'évolution de l'inflation au Canada. Les trois principaux risques à la hausse ont trait à la possibilité que la croissance de l'économie des États-Unis soit plus forte que prévu, les exportations canadiennes soient plus élevées et l'investissement résidentiel au Canada affiche un dynamisme renouvelé. Les trois principaux risques à la baisse touchant l'inflation au Canada sont liés à la crise européenne, à une faiblesse prolongée des investissements des entreprises et des exportations canadiennes et à la possibilité que la progression des dépenses des ménages canadiens soit plus faible. Dans l'ensemble, la banque estime que ces risques sont relativement équilibrés au cours de la période de projection. Now, reflecting all of these factors, the bank maintained today the target for the overnight rate at 1%. While some modest withdrawal of monetary policy stimulus will likely be required over time, consistent with achieving the 2% inflation target, the more muted inflation outlook and the beginnings of a more constructive evolution of imbalances in the household sector suggests that the timing of any such withdrawal is less imminent than previously anticipated. And with that, Tiff and I would be happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Randall Palmer, Reuters.
Governor, economists say your guidance now is about as dovish as it can get while still maintaining a tightening bias. One said that the market might interpret this as a prelude to a rate cut. Why don't you get rid of the tightening bias altogether, and do you categorically rule out a rate cut?
In terms of over the projection horizon, the expectation is that some modest withdrawal of monetary stimulus may be required. So the direction is clear. The timing has shifted. The timing of that expectation has shifted for the reasons that I stated, that the Bank's Governing Council has stated, which is that the inflation outlook is more muted, excess capacity in the economy has gone up, and importantly, we're seeing a constructive evolution of imbalances in the household sector. So all those factors together push back the need for any potential adjustment, any potential tightening. But that is still the ultimate direction. Now, I'm not going to categorically rule out anything. I mean, the Governing Council of the bank wouldn't categorically rule out anything at a point in the future if there is a different evolution of the forces that affect growth and inflation in Canada. So we'll adjust monetary policy, including guidance, as appropriate in order to meet our inflation target.
Is your tightening bias solely because of the economic and inflation projections, or is it also partly due to financial stability concerns in relation to the household sector, which you said would be signaled clearly if you did that?
Yeah, what I said in a speech in December, I think you're referring to, which was a refinement or more detailed explanation of what the bank has been doing, was to make as clear as we can, and I'll try to make it very clear, that if the bank were to take action, so if the bank were to adjust a policy rate, for reasons that related to financial stability, we would be very clear that that is why we're doing it. And we would, under our flexible inflation targeting regime, and we spelled this out in quite detail, I think, as you recall, when we released our inflation control update about a year ago, that under that regime, we will explain that why and to what extent we're willing to tolerate an adjustment over the horizon over which we return to target. Let me finish here because I've been told to keep it brief, is that on our forecast today, we're looking at a return to target in about 7 quarters, which is within absolutely the normal range, 6 to 8 quarters of return to target. So, and that includes the possibility of some withdrawal of monetary stimulus over the horizon, projection horizon.
Annie Dufour, TVA.
Oui, bonjour, M. Carney.
Bonjour.
C'est peut-être un peu la même question, mais posée différemment. Alors, vous nous dites que le taux de croissance de l'endettement dans votre rapport, le taux de croissance de l'endettement des ménages canadiens se stabilise un peu. Par contre, quand même, le niveau d'endettement des Canadiens demeure à un niveau historiquement le plus haut, 165 c'est le même niveau que tous ceux des autres pays qui ont à peu près la même cote 3A, et c'est des niveaux qui ne baissent pas. Et est-ce que vous ne trouvez pas que vous baissez votre garde trop vite en disant que vous gardez le taux d'intérêt, en fait, peut-être, en fait, pas de hausse de taux imminente? Parce qu'après tout, vous-même avez dit dans un passé assez récent, vous avez dit, écoutez, même si la valeur des actifs peut baisser, peut s'évaporer, mais la valeur de la dette, elle, va se maintenir.
Oui, non, nous maintenons notre garde, c'est votre phrase, nous maintenons notre garde. Il existe encore la possibilité d'un resserrement de la politique monétaire pendant la période de projection, comme je viens je viens de dire. Il existe à ce moment-ci des signes encourageants en ce qui concerne les déséquilibres dans le secteur des ménages. Ça c'est évident. Mais comme vous l'avez souligné, oui, le niveau de la dette des ménages canadiens demeure une concern. Mais c'est le premier aspect de régler la situation, c'est la stabilisation de la fardeau de la dette. Et point final, à ce moment-ci, le fardeau de la dette, c'est-à-dire le coût de la service de la dette, c'est très bas à ce moment-ci. Alors, c'est un peu différent la situation maintenant ici au Canada par rapport à la situation qui existait aux États-Unis avant la crise. Il y a des grandes différences entre les deux parce que la qualité des emprunteurs ici au Canada sont beaucoup plus élevés qu'aux États-Unis et le ratio de la dette est beaucoup plus bas ici que là-bas.
Peut-être je vais juste ajouter un point vers la fin de notre rapport. On souligne qu'il y a les risques à deux facettes autour des déséquilibres des ménages. Un risque, c'est que cet ralentissement, cette contraction dans le secteur de logement peut arrêter. Puis la vigueur que nous avons vue dans les années passées peut revenir. Et pour un bout de temps, ça va ajouter de demande, mais ça va exacerber les risques des ménages. À l'autre côté, la contraction peut s'accélérer et peut être trop vite, trop rapide. Jusqu'à ce point-ci, on voit un ralentissement, une contraction graduelle. Ça, c'est quelque chose d'encourageant, mais comme vous avez dit, c'est trop tôt pour diminuer notre garde.
Je note aussi comme deuxième question de relance, que vous mentionnez dans les risques à la baisse des exportations canadiennes qui doivent se maintenir. Ouais. On assiste présentement justement à un phénomène intéressant un peu de guerre des devises sur les marchés internationaux avec la Réserve fédérale qui achète des actifs, quelques banques centrales qui achètent des actifs pour faire baisser leurs devises, pour vendre leurs exportations de façon plus facile notamment. Qu'est-ce que peut faire le Canada? Est-ce que c'est pas un jeu de David contre Goliath? Qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire? Parce que comparé à la Réserve fédérale ou potentiellement la Banque centrale européenne, on ne peut pas faire grand-chose, non?
Vous êtes très littéraire aujourd'hui, madame. Mais non, il n'existe pas encore, et on espère pas du tout cette guerre de devises. C'est un terme, c'est un slogan en anglais qui existe maintenant. Il n'y a pas des interventions. Il y a presque... en ce qui concerne les pays avancés, il y a la Suisse qui a une politique d'intervention par rapport à leur devise. Mais pour les pays de G7, il y a 7 risques. Mais cette guerre n'existe pas encore. Nous avons des options, comme toutes les banques centrales, mais la Banque du Canada va être guidée par la cible d'inflation, le cadre de cible d'inflation flexible qui existe aussi.
Donc, ici. Ça ne vous inquiète pas? Ça en inquiète certains?
Oh non, c'est un risque. C'est un risque. Oui.
Richard Madden, CTV.
Hi, Governor. I just wanted to get into household debt. You have said that the debt-to-income ratio is stabilizing, although you have issued just some concerns about the continuation of high consumer debt. Today, you signal that rates will stay low and will remain unchanged for quite a while longer. So I'm wondering, how much responsibility rests on the bank's shoulders now for keeping rates low when that was one of the main reasons why Canadians went into such high debt?
Well, Richard, it's a fair question. I mean, one of the things that we have taken into account and the government and OSFI and others have taken into account has been this low-for-long interest rate environment that exists not just in Canada but more broadly. And the question is, what are the best tools to compensate for the incentives that exist for Canadians and some cohort of Canadians to potentially take on more debt than they ultimately can service over time. That's the big risk. It's not debt in itself is bad, but it's that some Canadians end up taking on too much debt for the full cycle. And what we've seen, obviously, is 4 tightenings of mortgage insurance rules by the government. We think those have been done at the right time, and they've been prudent, and they're having an impact. We've seen tightening of underwriting standards for banks by OSFI in the summer, and it has had, as to go back to Randall's question, well, the last 2 questions, it has had some influence on the stance of monetary policy on the balance, and we've been upfront about that. And you've seen some of the influence today, which is as it improves, as there is some constructive signs, encouraging signs in the household sector, the immediacy of the potential supportive role of monetary policy in this respect is reduced. I'll finish with this, though. The way we look at it, and I mean the global we, the federal government, the CMHC, OSFI, and ourselves look at how to address this situation, is that monetary policy is the last line of defense. What we don't want in this circumstance, what isn't right under either the inflation targeting regime, which we're guided, and in that context, what's not right for the Canadian economy as a whole, is to lead with monetary policy, adjust interest rates solely to address issues in the mortgage market, as important as they are, because obviously that will impact the currency, it'll impact exporters, it'll impact business borrowing, it'll impact other aspects of our economy, and we'll end up with a less sustainable path of growth as a consequence. So we're collectively managing the situation, and hopefully I put monetary policy in the right context for it.
Okay. And just switching gears to another question. It's about the country we'll soon be moving to. As you know, today there was the British Prime Minister announced a potential referendum on Britain staying in the European Union. I'm wondering if I can get your opinion. How important is Britain's presence in the EU for the region's economy, and what would the implications be for you in your role as a governor if the British vote to exit the EU?
Well, I leave such weighty decisions to Her Majesty's governments and ultimately, as Prime Minister Cameron indicated today, ultimately to the British people. The responsibility of the Bank of England will be to manage to the mandates that have been given to the Bank of England, and they. Like in Canada, is price stability judged by inflation target. It's also responsibility to contribute importantly to financial stability in the UK. But decisions are taken by elected officials, and in this case would be taken by the British people, and then the institution manages within that context. So it's not the institution's role to lead in any respect that debate, that discussion.
Okay,
Skated around, yeah. I won't be able to use that metaphor in the UK, though.
I have 4 more people on my list in about 10 minutes. It's starting with David Aiken, Sun News.
And looking ahead again to that job, you're going to be before a parliamentary committee in the UK on February 7th, so let's give you a little tune-up on that. Playing off the work our friends at the Globe Mail did about your summer vacation, I just want to get a sense of the uniqueness of that event. You were holidaying at Mr. Bryson's house. Was that the first time that you'd ever spent a holiday with either Mr. Bryson or any MP during your time as governor?
Well, David, thanks for helping me prep for my. I think there'll be a lot of issues that we'll discuss in London on February 7th, and I look forward to that appearance. Look, I'm going to say this, which is that my actions. Were appropriate. I think my actions were appropriate. They've been looked at by the General Counsel of the bank in consultation with the lead director of the independent lead director of the board of directors of the bank. They came to exactly the same conclusions. Actions were appropriate, and I understand that a few people, I was thinking about this over the holidays. I understand a few people had questions about it, and I respect those questions. But in the end, the actions were appropriate. And what we're talking about is my private life, my private vacation. And I don't see that I need to detail my private life and my interactions with my friends.
Just to follow on that, Ben, knowing what we know from our friends' reporting on this, that you were at least entertaining people from one party talking to you, and I know you said you quickly shut those down. We now look back at some of the things where you've interacted or talked about political discussions, and I'll reference a couple. At finance committees, I sat through finance committees where NDP MPs have challenged the inflation target and the inflation targeting regime. Sometimes there's been the suggestion that, labor output ought to be more important to the bank. Secondly, shortly after that stay with Mr. Bryson, you gave a speech which was, though there was no names mentioned, unavoidably taking issue with some themes that the leader of the official opposition had raised. And so New Democrats, at the very least in the country, may say and that you have politicized the Bank of Canada governor's position, now that we know that there was this political element in some of the things you were doing last summer.
Well, I'll say a couple things. Not surprisingly, I'm going to not agree with any of your premises there. The first is, look, what I can control. I can't control what people ask of me. I can control what I do. Very clearly, I didn't pursue. I haven't entered politics. I'm a lifelong central banker. Hopefully my life's a little longer than 5 years, but 5.5 years at least, long central banker. That's the first point. The second thing is that what I also control is how I discharge my responsibilities. And in discharging my responsibilities as governor of the Bank of Canada, it's all out here in the open. It's on the public record, whether it's testimony in front of a parliamentary committee, it's at a press conference, a speech, a paper, an analysis, whatever. It is there. And I stand by everything that I've done over the course of my term, in that it's the best effort collectively. Of course, it's the Bank of Canada. It's not an individual, but collectively that we could do to fulfill our mandates. And in terms of the discussion in the summer around the issue of the role of commodities in the Canadian economy, this is a fundamental issue in the Canadian economy. The net impact of, for example, the oil price on macroeconomic outcomes in Canada. It's a fundamental issue in terms of our trade strategy. It's a front-page issue today, yet again, in a variety of newspapers. It was yesterday. It was last week. It will continue to be. And it's an extremely important issue, as evidenced, I think, by we have a box in our monetary policy report again today on this issue, how the interaction between commodity prices, infrastructure, affects activity and inflation in Canada. So it's incumbent on us to explain that, and we'll continue to do so. So.
Annie, we don't have time. I'll come to you if we have time at the end.
Just to repeat that exact.
Ça va prendre du temps.
But just to say that in terms of do you politicize?
Okay. Nirmala Menon,
Merci.
Dow Jones.
Sorry.
The report talks about the economic toll being taken by the discount between Canadian and U.S. crude. And yet you have a very rosy outlook for next year, 2.7%. The IMF is predicting 2.3%. I'm just wondering how could you? Could you
square that. Well, I can't. What I won't be able to do is exactly square it with the IMF projection, which came out today. But I'll explain what the key elements of our forecast through this year and next year. And what we tried to do is right out at the start of the Canadian section, we have a graph. A chart, I think it's chart 19, which shows the contribution from investment and net exports. It's on a 4-quarter moving average basis. But you see that the drag, the unusual weakness that was experienced in both net exports and investment in the second half of last year. Now, some of that was temporary factors, some outages on offshore platforms in Newfoundland, some in Alberta, other aspects related to uncertainty, the impact of uncertainty and investment, uncertainty principally from the United States and policy in the United States. We saw a big impact of that actually on investment in the United States. We see some of that here, and that's been confirmed by our surveys in Canada. And some of that is also related to the slowing of domestic demand, which we had expected, consumption and household spending in Canada. So why do we come back in 2013, 2014? We see, first off, those temporary factors fully come off. Secondly, we expect that the discount on Western Canadian crude, it doesn't fully go away, but it starts to narrow. And again, we've outlined that in the box. That has a knock-on effect on investment. Thirdly, we do expect that this uncertainty effect, if you will, on investment is reduced. Not eliminated, but is reduced because of actions in Europe, because of some progress in the United States on the fiscal side, and also some demonstrated improvement in U.S. household spending and activity, so that helps the recovery that's there. I'd add to all of that this is all in the context of financial conditions in Canada, which have further improved from an already very accommodated space. But look, the recovery is importantly, we see consistency on consumption. We growing about 2%, household consumption. We see some decline in household expenditure, or in housing rather, and we see government more or less tracking as we saw before. So this is going to turn on is investment in net exports. We still have, final word on it, is we still have some judgment there which dampens down relative to the usual relationships between foreign demand and exports and foreign demand and other factors and domestic investment. Investment, as you see, is actually lower than historic averages over the course of the forecast horizon.
Separately, also wondering, could you please address Mr. Paulson's criticism that the Bank of England governor is too powerful?
I didn't. I must say I haven't read this. Was this testimony or it was testimony from yesterday? I haven't seen the testimony. I would, but let me make a general point, and this is really a question that I would hope we would discuss. I'm sure we will discuss when I appear in front of the Treasury Select Committee. But I would make the distinction between the responsibilities of the institution and the power of any individual within that institution. Part of my responsibility when I am there is that as the Bank of England gets additional responsibilities on the micro and macro prudential side, is to ensure that the committee structure, the new governance structure, the other aspects work to their full effect, to ensure that the institution is discharging its responsibilities in the right way. It's not relying on a single individual. It won't be, and that accountability is clear and transparent.
Les Whittington, Toronto Star.
Yes, Mr. Carney, you said in the report that Europe is still in recession, and I think you're indicating that while financial markets have improved somewhat, there are still risks in Europe, and you mentioned lack of credit availability.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, what do you think should be done to improve the economy in Europe?
Yeah. First thing on Europe, as I said at the outset, the more extreme the tail risks have diminished. This is a very positive development and owes a lot to the actions of the ECB, but also the actions of other policymakers in Europe that are starting to address some of the deeper institutional and structural issues. And that starts to be part of the answer to your question. Without question, a banking union that's worthy of its name is necessary in Europe. In other words, they've taken important steps just before the holidays on a single supervisor, giving that responsibility to the ECB. So, and why does that matter? That matters to help ensure consistency, but also to ensure that supervisors, national supervisors, don't ring-fence their institutions and effectively prevent them from lending cross-border or doing cross-border activity, which was happening in Europe to try to protect national jurisdictions, but that was weakening the whole. and that needs to be reversed, and having a objective and effective single supervisor led by the ECB is one of the ways to do that. The second thing that needs to be done in some jurisdictions, some institutions, is further either improve transparency or improve the capitalization or the capital buffers of the institution so that they have the capacity to lend. There will need to be further progress on banking union, other aspects. Deposit insurance is one of them. Clarity about where capital will come from, if it needs to come from, whether it will come from public or pan-European sources is an element of hot debate at the moment, or national or private. And then more broadly, a series of structural measures that some of which are in train on the national level, which need to continue to be followed through. Product and labor market reforms, in essence.
And looking ahead, in the last couple of years in Canada, you've taken about as stimulative a position relative to the economy as you could without jeopardizing inflation targets. Do you think, in terms of what the UK should be doing, what the Bank of England should be doing, that you would be inclined to give some thought to whether or not the balance has been appropriate at the Bank of England in terms of that playing off interest rate settings against inflation?
I think the MPC of the Bank of England has done an admirable job under extremely difficult circumstances, and I would, stand foursquare behind them. But I'm not yet the governor of the Bank of England, as you know, and I'm very happy that Mervyn King is going to serve there through the end of June. But there's no issue in terms of how they have conducted themselves. And I would say one other point I'll make, which is that, look, during the toughest times in the crisis, we cooperated very closely and effectively with the Bank of England and other partners in the G7 and broader G20. But with that core, with the Bank of England and their analysis and leadership was a very important element of addressing the worst of the crisis.
Bon, nous avons assez de temps pour une dernière question en français. Rudy Lecour.
What's changed in the housing market in the last...
Greg, there's an order. I'm sorry, Rudy's before you. Rudy Lecour, La Presse.
Bonjour. Bonjour. Vous précisez dans votre rapport qu'un resserrement monétaire est moins imminent. Et dans les remarques que vous avez faites depuis le début de la conférence de presse, vous avez même dit qu'il y a encore la possibilité d'un resserrement pendant la période d'observation, ce qui signifie qu'il n'y en aura pas nécessairement. Le principal problème intérieur, ce serait l'endettement des ménages, mais pour stimuler l'épargne, il faut aussi récompenser l'épargne. Pourquoi, à ce moment-là, si le problème intérieur le plus important, c'est l'endettement des ménages, on continue de faire de la répression financière comme aux États-Unis ou en Europe?
On continue de faire quoi?
De la répression financière.
Ici au Canada? Mais il n'existe pas ici au Canada.
S'il n'y a pas d'épargne, l'épargne n'est pas récompensée, on n'a aucun intérêt à...
Bon, ça, c'est pas la répression financière. La répression financière, c'est de régler... ou de forcer des décisions privées. En effet, ça c'est par exemple de forcer une institution d'acheter des obligations de trésor. Ça c'est la répression financière. Non, c'est ici ce qui existe ici au Canada, c'est la politique monétaire et un mécanisme de transmission. Il y a des opinions diverses en ce qui concerne la politique monétaire. La tendance de la politique monétaire ici au Canada, et selon la Banque du Canada, c'est approprié afin d'atteindre la cible d'inflation.
Oui.
Ouais. Should I answer Greg's question?
Well, Monsieur
Oui,
Lecour, on relance. Si vous voulez un autre, non? Okay.
Non.
Greg Quinn.
Oui, c'était après.
Il faut finir, oui.
Very recently, the bank had been talking about household imbalances.
Yeah, sorry.
The bank very recently had been talking about household imbalances and saying it's too soon to tell what's going on with recent slowing. What's changed recently that you now say there are constructive trends in that area?
Well, I mean, this is an evolution, and we have, when we've had a chance to comment, I mean, Tiff, actually, you can comment because you spoke most recently on it.
Sure. I'll give you a few points of data that we highlight in the report. If you look at housing sales, they have come down below their 10-year average, a little bit below. Housing starts, they were running sort of 225. They're now, last 2 months, running around 200. We think demographic demand is about 185, so they're still running above demographic demand, but they've moved in the right direction. So those are, if you look at prices, they have gone up a lot. They remain elevated, but the rate of increase has moderated. They've been fairly flat recently. So those are some constructive signs that we're moving towards a more balanced housing market, but it's been a 10-year buildup, and it's too early to declare success.
And the last point I'd just add to that is that household credit growth has gone from north of 10% to a little more than 3%. So it's starting to approach the growth of disposable income.
Okay, I see that your people have their coats on and ready to go. Mr. Carney's leaving for Davos right now. Thank you, everyone.
Anyone wants to come?
C'est sur Davos, justement.
Une question sur Davos.
Sur Davos, oui. Mais justement, à Davos, M. Carney, on parle, il y a des banquiers, une des propositions qui est sur la table, c'est que certaines banques sont trop grosses pour être bien gérées. Est-ce que vous êtes de cette école de pensée, M. Carney?
Ça dépend sur l'institution. C'est une des risques en ce qui concerne les institutions systémiques financières internationales. C'est une des raisons pour lesquelles nous avons augmenté le CSF, nous avons augmenté le coffre, le montant de fonds propres des banques. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle nous travaillons très durement, longuement, afin de créer un système de résolution transfrontière des plus grandes institutions internationales. Alors, votre question est très pertinente. Merci. Thank you.